Right.
How many do we have?
People are trickling in now, so good evening, everybody. Thanks for joining us. Apologies for the late start. Looks like we have some attendees coming in here. We're just going to give it a couple minutes to allow everybody to trickle in. Obviously, we're off to a little bit of a late start here, so thanks for your patience. Just hang tight while we get everybody in the webinar. All right, good evening, everybody. Thank you for joining. We're just going to give it a couple minutes here, allow everybody to join. Off to a little bit of a late start, but we're going to get going momentarily here. So thanks for your patience.
Chris, is Katie Williams in? Can you tell? She just sent me an email saying she's having trouble getting in.
I don't see her,
I'm
Carol.
not seeing her. It's like we have 17 so far.
Could she be under another name?
Carol, maybe you could send her the invite link if you grab it from the participants list
Yeah,
area?
she's responding to your email that you had sent out. I will do that.
She can also go into the town website and just click
Yep.
the link.
Yep.
Yeah, it's right on the front.
Oh, somebody just joined.
Mhm.
All right, so I'm not really seeing any more folks joining. So we wanted to get going.
Get away.
Okay. Good evening, everyone. I'm Carol Lisbon, Chair of the Dover Planning Board, and on behalf of the entire MBTA Communities Act team, thank you for joining us tonight. It's wonderful to see you all participating. This is actually the fourth information session that we've had since February, and we've heard from over 100 residents during these sessions, which is absolutely fantastic. And this dialogue is really, really important to us because we're going to be providing you with some education about the MBTA Communities Act, but almost more invaluable is your feedback to us as we proceed in putting together a bylaw and deciding on an overlay district. The key to remember is that we have a deadline of December 31st, 2025 to pass a bylaw, or the state will be penalizing us in ways that will be discussed in just a little bit. So we've been working on this for over 3 years, and it's my honor tonight to introduce you to the team. Jody Hsu is Vice Chair of the Planning Board and the MBTA Project Leader Extraordinaire. Jeff Davis is a representative from Horton Witten, which is a consulting firm, and Jeff has been working with us on the intricacies of the MBTA Communities Act. Town Planner Jasmine Farinacci has been working with the state agencies and coordinating with them. And Chris Costello is Dover's assistant, I should say, town administrator, and he's been working on not only this webinar, but also on the communication plan with us. So tonight you'll be hearing from Jody, Robin, and Jeff, and they will provide a review of the MBTA Communities Act. the preliminary results of the townwide survey that we started in early March. And then we'll ask 4 specific questions for some live input. And then we'll go to a question and answer period, and we'd like to hear your comments and suggestions. I should note that the chat function is disabled. You can use the hand raise feature or the Q&A feature. So with that, let's get started. I'm going to turn this over to Jody.
Thank you, Carol. Good evening. And thank you so much for being here. As Carol said, it's really been helpful for us in the sessions that we've had thus far to be able to talk with residents about the MBTA Communities Act, to share what we've been learning in this multi-year process, and to hear from all of you about what you want to understand better and get your thoughts on how we can go about this fairly complex process. So tonight, as Carol said, I'm going to be walking you through some basic facts about the process and our project plan. You'll be hearing from Robin, you'll be hearing from Jeff Davis, and hopefully at the end of all of this, you're going to feel more knowledgeable about the MBTA Communities Act, what it means for Dover, what we're doing, and you're going to have some questions for us, because what I've learned in this process is that I'm learning the most as I try to communicate about this initiative, because you all have really great questions. If you've come to one of our previous information sessions, I hope you'll learn something new tonight. We've taken a lot of the input we got from other sessions and tried to reimagine this one just a little bit so that hopefully you'll come away with some new information. Next slide, please. So to begin, I want to get everybody level set with some baseline understandings about this law and what specifically it means for Dover, and ultimately why we're all here tonight. So the MBTA Communities Act was signed into law by Charlie Baker's administration in 2021. And the intention of the law was to create more housing near public transit. That's it in a nutshell. The law requires every one of the 177 communities that have public transportation within their boundaries or are adjacent to towns that have that sort of public transit to update their zoning to legalize the construction of some multifamily housing by right. And so I want to be very clear. This is a law that was brought to us by the state, and it is the responsibility of the planning board by statute to bring a change to our zoning bylaw in Dover alongside some changes to our zoning map to town meeting. And ultimately, it's the citizens of Dover who will vote on this effort and decide whether or not you, as residents of Dover, accept this and want to put this into law or not. You're going to hear about some of the consequences if we choose as a town by our voting at town meeting not to do that, and Robin will walk us through that. But I really want to sort of level set here that this is not a specifically planning board initiative from the town of Dover. This is a state law, and we're doing our very best. We take the responsibility to take this to town meeting, this legal responsibility, very seriously. And so we really thank you for your attention to it. Ultimately, the state is aiming to encourage more housing to be built and to remove barriers to multifamily residential development near transit locations. And I'll tell you a little bit more about that as we walk through the slides. Next one, please. So here's what every one of the 177 towns in the MBTA communities catchment areas are required to do. We all must have one or more zoning districts in which multifamily housing is permitted by right, which means, very simply, but it's a little more complicated than very simple, we can have site plan review as part of the approvals for multifamily housing, but not a special permit. So no going to the Zoning Board of Appeals for special permits for multifamily housing. The minimum gross density in the district that we develop needs to be 15 units per acre. We're going to talk about that a little bit more so you can understand what that involves. The bylaw that we draft cannot include age restrictions, so it must allow for housing for families with children, can't have bedroom or occupancy caps. And really importantly, we need to develop a bylaw that allows for parity with other uses, which is sort of a fancy way of saying the multifamily housing that is allowed by right cannot be required to meet higher standards than other permitted uses in town. So we can't put extra onerous provisions on development in the multifamily overlay district. Compliance deadlines vary, but as you know, ours is December 31st of this year. Next slide, please. But you might be asking, if you haven't been paying as much attention as you are tonight, why are we doing this in Dover? Because we don't have an MBTA station. There are essentially 4 buckets that towns fall into, these 177 towns, and you can see those on the left: rapid transit, commuter rail, etc. We're an adjacent small town that you see here in red, which essentially means we're adjacent to a municipality with MBTA services, and those are Needham, Natick, Walpole, Wellesley, and Westwood. And we're a community of either 7,000 people or less, or a population density, as you see here, of less than 500 persons per square mile. So we're the last bucket, the latest compliance deadline. All of these other groups have already met their compliance deadlines or are meeting them this May, and we've got till December. Some other adjacent small towns, if you're curious, are places like Sherburne, Carlisle, and a few others. Okay, next slide. It's also maybe a question mark in your head. What do we actually mean when we talk about multifamily housing? So here's the state's definition. Multifamily housing is a building with 3 or more residential dwelling units, or 2 or more buildings on the same lot with more than 1 residential dwelling unit in each building. And that's going to play out as we go forward. I hope to give you a better understanding of what that involves. Next slide, please. This graphic gives you a sense of all the different ways that housing can sort of play out across the spectrum. The key here is that the MBTA Communities Act allows us to think about what's the best type for Dover. And we get to determine what that type is. You know, we have to meet the definition, but we get to determine that by the bylaw that we write and the dimensional standards that we set. And, you know, what we think about when we think about multifamily housing in Dover is the type of homes that might be a better fit for people at different stages of their life. Elderly residents looking to downsize, empty nesters, young adults, single parents, you name it. There's lots of different reasons. But really, ultimately, we're thinking about what makes the most sense for Dover and how can we develop a bylaw that protects against what we don't want in Dover, but also complies to the maximum extent of the law, because that's obviously really important. Next slide, please. So pictures are very helpful. We've got duplexes, we've got triplexes. We already have some multifamily housing in Dover already. And while we can't dictate design considerations when it comes to the development of multifamily housing, we can set dimensional standards and other requirements through, again, the bylaw language that we develop. So we're going to get to that just a little bit later. Next slide, please. I just really appreciate the questions that we've had over the course of these many months, because it's revealed for us where we're not doing a good job communicating about what the MBTA Communities Act requires and what it doesn't. And it gives us an opportunity in these sessions to try to get right to the heart of some of those big questions that we keep hearing over and over again. So here are a few of them. Many people confuse the MBTA Communities Act with 40B development, and it is not the same. And it's really important that we talk about the ways that it is not the same. One of them is that Dover residents, through our town meeting process, get to decide where the overlay district gets sited in our town. And that's really notably different from the 40B development process, where a developer comes in and we're kind of responding to where a developer attempts to build 40B housing. So that's one. Another is that this bylaw allows us to limit this to one district, one overlay district in town, and that's it. So there's not a scope creep when it comes to MBTA development. We're going to establish, if we vote at town meeting to approve this, one overlay district in town where multifamily housing would be allowed. Also, The MBTA Communities Act does not require that towns include an affordable housing mandate in the bylaw. And we at the planning board level and through discussions with many, many residents of Dover have made the determination that our focus is on market rate housing, not affordable housing. And we won't be building an affordable housing requirement into the bylaw language. So that's really different. And then this is a big one. 3A, which is a shortcut term for MBTA Communities Act compliance. It does not supersede or override Dover wetlands or Title V laws, and that's a really important piece of information, which we'll talk about a little bit further. Next slide, please. The MBTA Communities Act does not require the following. It does not require that multifamily housing, in fact, be built in Dover. What it requires us is to zone for the possibility that multifamily housing would be built in this one overlay district location. It also does not require Dover as a town to design, pay for, or approve new infrastructure to accommodate any proposed multifamily development in this MBTA overlay district now or someday in the future. That is not the responsibility of the town. So thinking about water, thinking about sewer and septic requirements, that's not for the town. That is a developer would have to go through normal channels, and that may or may not be possible from a development perspective, but that's not what this is all about because that's not the responsibility of the town. The MBTA Communities Act also does not supersede, as I said, or override Dover's existing wetlands or Title V laws. It does not remove any existing underlying zoning. So depending upon where this overlay district gets cited, we already have zoning in that location. Whether it's R1, R2, or different types of zoning, that remains in force. And the property owners in this location could choose to develop as an R1 district, if that's where it's located, or R2, or the alternative option would be to take advantage of the overlay district zoning. So that's really important to note. The underlying zoning remains in force. It also does not require anyone who owns property in an overlay district to do anything at all. There's no requirement. It's just sitting there as an overlay district for some potential theoretical future development. Next slide. And really importantly, any proposed development in the overlay district that we as a community decide to zone for would require compliance with all applicable Dover laws, including, and there are probably others that I've missed, Dover's Board of Health Regulations, Conservation Commission Wetlands Bylaw, Chapter 263, our new Dover Stormwater Bylaw, Chapter 159, building departments and state building and fire codes, planning board's site plan review, public safety requirements from police and fire, and the list goes on. Those all remain in force. So hopefully this section that I just walked through gives you a little bit of a macro understanding of what the MBTA Communities Act is and what it is not. And when we talk about multifamily housing, what we mean by that. I want to hand off to Robin Hunter, the chair of our Board of Selectmen, to give you an understanding of what's at stake for Dover when we think about compliance and why it matters so much that you're all here paying attention and understanding what it is, what it isn't, and what it means to comply with this law. So Robin, I'm going to hand it off to you.
Thank you, Jody. So good evening, everybody. As Jody mentioned, I'm Robin Hunter, and I am currently the chair of the Dover Board of Selectmen. So what I want to talk about this evening is what we know today about what it could mean to the town of Dover if we do not comply with this law. So state officials have told us that we would lose eligibility to key state grant opportunities, and we could potentially lose certain grants that are funded currently by the federal government. We also know from neighboring towns, such as many of you may know, that Milton did challenge the MBTA Communities Act. That legal cost to challenge this act could be very high, and the outcome is most definitely uncertain. Just to put this litigation into perspective, as of today, I believe there are only 3 towns that are actually contesting the MBTA Communities Act compliance. The other thing is, so many of you wonder, well, what does Dover get? Dover doesn't get any grants. Are we really gonna lose anything? And I'll show you on some of the other slides, but really on average, the town of Dover gets $1 million of grants annually. Some years we get 400,000, other years we get 2 million. And these grants are a direct offset to our operating budget. So because I'm a finance person and I love to play with numbers, I did this back of the envelope calculation to try and put it into perspective for all citizens of Dover. What does it mean to me? That's what everybody wants to know. How could this impact my pocketbook? So what I did, and this is an art and not a science, but I will have my calculation validated. I backed into what it would mean to lose $1 million in grants, because we get grants to offset things that are already in our budget. So what that would mean is that $1 million, instead of coming from a grant, would have to be funded by all of us in Dover through our property taxes. So if my home was valued at 1.4 million, which is the median assessed value in the town in 2025, doing a little bit of reverse engineering, I was able to approximate that each of our tax bills to fund this would go up about 2.5%, which for the owner of a $1.4 million home, it equates to somewhere around $400 a year. So you would be paying an additional $400 for $1 million of grant funding that we get. I want to make certain that my words aren't taken out of context. I am not suggesting that every year we have $1 million of grants, and those grant opportunities have to exist for us not to be able to get that grant. Our staff has really done a lot of work and is aware of grants that can help offset some of our operating costs. So we are very, very fortunate to have them applying for all of these grants. Next slide. So what I tried to do was, with the help of the staff, is go back to 2020 and to look at the grants that we have received for various infrastructure and other programs. And as you can see, just like I mentioned in my first slide, the amounts vary. In 2024, we got close to $1 million. In 2020, it was only 500,000. So on average, if you average this out, it's around $1 million a year that we may not be able to apply for these grants. We also have some very large capital projects in the near future, and we already know and have been earmarked for some of these grants. However, if we don't pass the MBTA Communities Act, based upon what the officials in the Commonwealth of Massachusetts are telling us, these grants could be at risk. One of the very big grants that we have is approximately $13 million for the Center Street Bridge, which needs to be replaced or repaired. And that's the bridge going between Dover and Needham. The $2.6 million 2 million of that we received in 2022 relates to the design of that bridge. So again, we have to repair and replace that bridge, and we would have had to pay $2 million for the design had we not been able to secure a grant from the Commonwealth of Massachusetts. We also annually get grants for our roads. They are approximately, it's called Chapter 70 funds, and those are 90 funds, and those are approximately $200,000 to $250,000 a year. Again, a significant amount of funding. There are also an opportunity for Green Communities grants. We apply for those grants to replace infrastructure such as lights, HVAC units. This allows us to get more efficient equipment, and again, the state contributes or pays for the replacement of those funds. On the following slides, I have a detailed list of all of the grants that we've gotten. I'm not going to go through them grant by grant, but you will see that it is significant. And you know, I would like to make you all aware that for the first 4 months of 2025, we have already secured $400,000 in grants. One of the grants is significant to us. It's a $100,000 grant, which we are able to use to offset about 80% of the cost for our online permitting software. So these grants are important to us as a town. They are important to all of our pocketbooks because these are things that we're not funding directly from our real estate or property taxes, which if we weren't compliant with the MBTA Communities Act, that's how we would need to fund them. So, you know, this presentation is online. Please take time to look at it and see all of the grants that we do get each year. So thank you all.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Robin. That's super helpful. And this presentation will be up on our MBTA webpage, including the recording of this info session. So you can go back and share this with your friends. Thank you, Robin. So we've done some work here on the big picture, sort of education. What is the MBTA Communities Act? What is it not? We've talked about the risk to the towns if we don't comply, what's at stake on the financial side of the equation. So now I just want to turn our attention to what we actually need to do. And it's really 3 things. So sounds simple, a little more complicated than it seems. But number 1, we have to identify an area to be zoned for MBTA compliance, which is an overlay district. We're going to talk about that tonight specifically. We also concurrently have to write a zoning bylaw that regulates this specific type of development in the proposed overlay district, and only in that proposed overlay district. So can't take it and apply it to somewhere else in town. And we're working hard on the writing of that zoning bylaw. That happens at the planning board, as all zoning bylaws do. And we're working closely with town council and also Jeff Davis, our consultant, who you'll be hearing from shortly. So that's a work in progress. And then finally, we have to take this to a town meeting. And we need, as a town, to vote to approve, hopefully, this bylaw and zoning map amendment before December 31st of 2025. So that's sort of our marching orders. Next slide, please. What have we been doing to prepare? Well, number 1, in 2023, we started working with Jeff Davis at Horsley Witten Group to help us with this process. We started by thinking about initial locations that we could identify as potential MBTA overlay district zones, just as a starting point for discussion. And we'll talk about what that framework was that we developed. We have also been working with Horsley Witten and Town Council to develop the first draft of the MBTA Communities Act bylaw. It's up on the town website now, but it's a work in progress. So you'll see updated versions of that in the very near future. That's been a really dynamic process where we've done a lot of crosswalking with other towns. We've been talking with other town planners. We've been talking with town council, with our consultants. So we're getting feedback from some of you. So thank you for that. And then also back in March, we launched a community-wide survey to get feedback from residents of Dover as to the various locations that we had identified at the start. Next slide, please. So here are some guidelines for us. These are from the state. This is what all small adjacent towns have to work with. Number one, we have a minimum multifamily housing unit capacity of 102 units. That's unique to Dover, and that's based on a formula of 5% of our 2020 housing stock. So that number is just assigned to us. So we have to create an overlay district and an accompanying bylaw with dimensional requirements that would allow for up to, a minimum of 102 units of multifamily housing. The minimum gross density in the zoned area is 15 units per acre. That's a state requirement, and I'll tell you a little bit more about what that means. The land area, no minimum size requirement for Dover, given our small adjacent status. We at the Planning Board, and in consultation with many of you and other boards in town, the Housing Task Force, have made the determination to pursue one overlay district as opposed to multiple smaller districts. And just a little bit back of the envelope math, that translates to an overlay district of approximately 7 acres in size, because 102 units at 15 units per acre kind of gets us there. So we know we have to be sort of at that minimum land mass in order to accommodate the gross density. No location requirements. We can put this anywhere that it makes sense. We cannot put it on town-owned land or on conservation land. So take those out of your brain if you're thinking about them. And we have this compliance deadline of December 31st. Next slide, please. Unit capacity is a term that a lot of people aren't familiar with. And it's essentially this idea that when we think about unit capacity, and on the last slide, I outlined that it's we have to come up with 102 units. Basically, we take the parcel of land that we are identifying as a overlay district, and we imagine, even if it's already developed, that it's undeveloped. And we treat that as an undeveloped parcel and evaluate what could be built under 15 unit per acre zoning. So it's a sort of a theoretical process, but it gives us something to work with, and it allows us to imagine these parcels as undeveloped land. Next slide, please. So our process has been 3 steps, really. First, identify some potential locations and consider, like, where might this make sense? Multifamily overlay district makes sense in town, and what would be appealing? And that's really what we're asking for your feedback here tonight. And we've been asking for through multiple information sessions and through requests for ideas and a town-wide survey. And we're going to ask for more feedback tonight. Step 2 is to be thinking about dimensional requirements. So dimensional requirements are things like setbacks, building height, those kinds of things that go into zoning to sort of manage and put some guardrails around the kind of development that we in Dover want to see happen. We know it has to comply with a law, 15 units per acre, 102 units minimum, but we can put some guardrails around that. Step 3 is to enter this data into the state's compliance model and test different iterations. We can play with building height, we can play with setbacks, we can play with lots of different things, but we try to do that in a way that allows us to consider various locations and whether or not they will meet the compliance requirements, but also that meet the town's needs. So we're trying to do all of these things at the same time and come up with a solution that we think will be the best fit possible for Dover. Next slide, please. So as I said, the first step was identifying these potential locations, and we came up with a 5-part framework for thinking about that because we had to start somewhere, and we had never done this before. So we thought, all right, let's think. We started by saying, okay, we know we want it to be one single area, because some towns will develop overlay districts in lots of different locations because they have much greater housing requirements than us. And we could have done small location, but it gets very complicated, and there's some legal requirements around those smaller locations being contiguous to one another. So to keep it simple, we decided that we would focus on a single area where compliance can be met. we thought, okay, well, let's look at pre-existing developments, because we know that slide that I shared with you about unit capacity allows us to imagine these parcels as undeveloped when we think about compliance. So let's start with some developed locations and see what we might be able to accomplish. But also, step 3, let's look at some undeveloped property where density might be less likely to disturb residential neighborhoods. Let's see what we can find. Let's think about proximity to town services, because maybe that makes sense, maybe it doesn't, but let's think about it and factor it in. And then always we have to consider state compliance criteria really carefully, because all of this doesn't matter if we develop an overlay district and it doesn't comply with what the state requires for us. So that's our framework. Next slide, please. And we asked Horsley Witten to work with us and look at some 4 existing development sites as part of that process. The first 2 were County Court in blue and the pastures in red. As you can see here, those are over off of Route 109 County Street. So those were our first 2 we asked them to take a look at. Next slide, please. And then also 2 near the town center, Dover Farms in pink and the Meadows in green, that most of you are familiar with. You can see the townhouse kind of smack in the middle there. Then we said, okay, but we also want to look at some undeveloped areas. So we were approached in the summer or fall of 2024 by Pulte Homes regarding a potential development over on Junction Street near the middle school, high school complex. And so we thought, okay, well, that's interesting, because right now a developer coming into town doesn't really have any other opportunity for multifamily housing development than 40B. Maybe we should consider an alternative option, and this is something we should consider. So we asked Horsley Witten to look at Junction Street. Next slide, please. So step 2 was, okay, let's think about dimensional requirements. What would we start with? And Jeff Davis, our genius consultant, reminded me that we actually already have a multifamily bylaw on the books in Dover. It was passed at town meeting in about, I think it was 1991. It's chapter 18542. We can't use that one. That would be too easy if we could just say, hey, we already have multifamily housing. It doesn't comply with the law because there's a whole lot of hurdles that a developer would need to meet, including rezoning at town meeting and also special permitting for the development. And we know that this area has to allow for by right multifamily developments. But because town meeting had already approved some dimensional requirements, we thought, let's start there. And you're looking at them. Minimum lot size of 20,000 square feet, which is about a half an acre. Street frontage minimums, max building height of 2.5 stories or 35 feet, maximum lot coverage, minimum open space, and then minimum setbacks at the front, side, and rear. So Jeff wisely advised us to use these as our initial dimensional requirements that he would toss into the compliance model. Next slide, please. And that's a model which was released by the state in August of 2022. And it's just a very step-by-step. I'm making it sound really easy. I don't know how to do it, but thankfully I have Jeff who works with us on that. So I'm going to hand this over to Jeff to tell you more about the compliance model, and then also to take you through what we learned when we put those properties into it. Jeff.
Thank you so much, Jody and Robin. Really appreciate that. And just for everyone who's on the call, it's been tremendous working with the staff and volunteers in your community. You've got some really bright minds working on this, and you're very fortunate. So, as Jody mentioned, we did take these 5 areas and the dimensional standards that she just described to you to see which of these properties would work in the compliance model, would conform with the requirements of the state. And of the 5, there are 3 that on their own would comply. So county courts, all of these, you're with the exception of the pastures and the meadows, you're all over that 7 acres threshold that Jody was describing. But again, what really matters is that dwelling unit per acre, that it's at least 15. And that was achieved everywhere except Dover Farms. But both Dover Farms and the pastures at Dover were below that theoretical 102 unit unit capacity. But that means we have County Court, Junction Street, and the meadows that could all theoretically meet the state standards. So as Jody mentioned earlier, we opened a public survey on March 4th. The data I'm going to show you now are the results through April 17th. We had 171 responses as of then. The survey remains open. We're probably going to close it soon. It's definitely been slowing down, but I think we're seeing very consistent feedback from the respondents so far. So first question was, we asked people to provide their input on the meadows, and if you think that this is an appropriate spot for multifamily housing by right in Dover. So everyone responded, all 171, and of those respondents, a majority, 53.8%, do not support an MBTA community's overlay district here at the Meadows. Just under 40% would support or somewhat support. And one of the things that I found interesting the first time we presented these numbers, and continues to be very interesting, only 7% of people said they needed more information. So it means people have very strong feelings about this, and we're pretty certain whether they support this or do not support this. In terms of some of the comments, we allow people to give comments on why they voted the way they did. There was concern about a lack of public transit at this site, concern in general about bringing more children into the educational system, traffic in the downtown area, town center area, and potential impacts on water resources. And I should note, of course, that one of the things that Jody and others have been working to do is to dispel some of these issues. So, for example, the impacts on water resources. You know, the state's not going to force the town to develop something that's going to have negative impacts on your existing resources and your utility capacity. But of course, that has been a concern of some folks. Next, we asked people the same question for county court. How do you feel about this location? And this location, again, all 171 people responded. This was the most favorable. So we're looking at about 60% of respondents supported or fully supported, somewhat or fully supported this location. A much lower percentage, 35.1%, do not support this location. People noted that this is a good location for density, relatively speaking. It's relatively close to traffic or transit compared to some of the other sites. There were some concerns that an increased use of the septic system may cause problems for neighbors, and of course, a potential rise in traffic on Route 109. But generally speaking, this was the most favored of the three. So finally, we ask about Junction Street. And oh, I did not update that. That was 171 responses. My apologies. So this was also not well received by a majority of respondents. 52.6% do not support an overlay at this location. Concerns were, again, lack of public transit, potential loss of natural habitat because this is an undeveloped site, and concern about traffic, particularly given the location next to the high school and middle school complex. So finally, noting that, you know, there are a number of people who are not happy with any of these locations, we wanted to see, well, what do you prefer? If you had to choose one as your preference, what would it be? So we asked people to rank each of the three sites. What is your first choice, second choice, third choice? And again, this is very consistent with what we heard in the first three questions. County Court, nearly half of all respondents picked County Court as their preferred location. And obviously the Junction Street and Meadows were much farther behind. So continues to be a clear preference for County Court. Finally, we asked, do you own property in Dover that you think could be appropriate? So if, you know, there are other locations in town and, you know, we don't want people pointing at their neighbors and saying, oh yeah, I want it here. So we asked if you own property in town that you think the town should be considering for this overlay, let us know. So one person responded, and that was someone who actually lives at County Court. And other than that, we had no one volunteer their property. We asked a final question, open-ended question, if people had any other thoughts or comments they wanted to share. Just a handful of the most common themes, that there's limited public transit. They're concerned about an increase in traffic, again, potential effects on the school system, and the impacts on your water and septic infrastructure. So this evening, we are going to have an opportunity to hear directly from you. We have some pop-up polls that Chris is going to be pulling up for you. This should pop up as a separate window or a box on your screen, and you'll be allowed to respond. So you know, we collected information at the last one of these sessions. We'll collect this information. We will report on them separately from what we're receiving from the online survey results, because we know that many of you hopefully have already taken that online survey, so we don't want to cross-pollinate those results, but we do want to hear what people have to say tonight. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Chris to start pulling up the pop-up polls.
Yeah, thank you, Jeff. We'll just get started. So first, we're going to do the pop-up poll for the Meadows. You should see a little box pop up on your screen with some of the options that are mirrored on the slide. So if you want to go ahead and select one of those, looks like everyone's pretty comfortable with this so far. I'm seeing lots of responses coming in fast. So thanks, everybody. Probably just going to give it a good 30 seconds here. Allow everybody some time. We've already got about 85% of everyone in attendance responding. So thanks. Just another 10 seconds here. I'm not seeing any new responses coming in. So okay. All right, nice job, everybody. So we'll end the poll and we will share the results. Hopefully you all can see that. Looks like we have spread mostly for not supporting this location and at 58% and fully support at 32%.
All right, next we have county courts. So again, we want to know, do you fully support this, somewhat support it, not support it, or need more info?
So we're going to go ahead and launch this poll. Should see that pop up for everybody. Go ahead and respond. Looks like everyone's very comfortable with the polling system here. We've already got 90% of responses. So good job, everybody. Thank you for the feedback. Just going to give it another 10 seconds. Okay, so we'll share the results. Looks like we have 74% for fully support, 11% for somewhat support, and 16% for not support.
It's interesting. Significantly higher support even than past polls. All right.
Okay.
Finally, Junction Street.
Launch Junction Street. Another 10 seconds or so. Those responses in. Right, just another 10 seconds here. All right, not seeing any new responses. So we'll end this one. Share the results. Looks like we have 35% for fully support, 12% somewhat support, and 53% not support.
Very similar to what we've heard so far.
Okay.
All right. Now, like you saw before, we're going to ask you to rank all three locations. So 1 being the location you think is most appropriate, and 3 being the location you think is least appropriate for this overlay.
So this one's a little different. You should see some options on the row side for the locations and the preference along the top column. So just go ahead and visualize your multiple answers. Just go ahead and select and prioritize those. We'll give a little extra time for this one since it is a different format on the question. Do another 15 seconds here. Still a really great participation. So thank you everybody for sharing your opinions. All right, so we'll go ahead and end the poll. Share the results. Okay, starting with, looks like we have county court as most appropriate. Then we have, it's tough to see the percentage breakdown here, but it looks like it's very similar for somewhat appropriate for both the Meadows and Junction Street, and also similar for least appropriate for both Meadows and Junction Street.
All right. Well, thank you all for that feedback. Again, I think we're really reinforcing what we've been hearing from others so far. All right. Turn back over to Jody for some words, and then we'll open it up to Q&A.
Thank you very much. Before we get to sort of the what comes next, which is the final slide before Q&A, I just want to leave everybody with these important points because I don't believe we can say them enough. MBTA Communities Act compliance is a requirement for the town of Dover to zone. It is not a requirement for us to build. That's number one. We are not, as a town, responsible for the design or financing of any new infrastructure to accommodate multifamily development in an MBTA overlay district. The law does not supersede or override our wetlands or Title V laws and does not remove existing underlying zoning. I just feel the need to keep saying those things because it's a very significant point of confusion for lots of people, and those are important points to keep in mind. Next slide, please. So what comes next? That's our final slide. Thank you. Okay, so what happens next? We have ongoing work that is focused on drafting a bylaw. So we're working on that as a planning board and closely with, as I said, Jeff, and closely with our town council and our town planner. So we are working on that because you may know that any zoning bylaw change that gets approved at a town meeting has to ultimately be approved by the Attorney General. And because the MBTA Communities Act is new for many towns, a pre-review process has been created by the state. We are going, as a planning board, to submit a draft bylaw and a proposed overlay district location to the Executive Office of Housing and Livable Communities. This is the sort of macro entity that will be reviewing for what's called a pre-review process. It's a process that can take up to 90 days. So we have some pressure to get that process going. We want to do that by May 15th in order that we can get feedback from the state before we come to town meeting about the various components of the bylaw that we draft and the location we select. And one of the reasons that we've been trying to surface multiple potential locations is because the state will pre-review the location that we choose. And as most of you will know on this call, County Court and the Meadows were developed using a comprehensive permit under the Chapter 40B process. And so the state is going to be looking at that. So if, for example, we take County Court as our preferred location, which is sort of what we're hearing here in all of these surveys and feedback that we're getting from the town, we will take that to the state for pre-review. There are examples of towns who have chosen to place an overlay district where existing 40B development is built. It is not clear to us that there's a town that is doing that with one overlay district. They tend to be towns that have multiple overlay districts because they're larger. So we will take this process, assuming that the planning board takes a vote and agrees to move forward with that, it would go through a pre-review process. So that's sort of a, hey, wait, there's more moment in this whole process, but we're marching forward with multiple options. So that's an unknown piece of this puzzle. Ultimately, we're planning for a special town meeting in the fall to vote on the MBTA compliant zoning bylaw and accompanying overlay district. The town meeting will be held on September 29th at Mudge Auditorium at the high school, middle school complex. And we have a backup date in mind, and that is November 17th. So mark your calendars for both. In the event that the town does not vote for compliance on September 29th, we will have to regroup as quickly as we can, come up with an alternative, and go back to town meeting on November 17th. These dates were chosen specifically with December 31st in mind because we have a lot of legal and administrative requirements that we have to uphold as a town on the way to town meeting, like public hearings and notifications and things of this nature. So there are very formulaic timelines that we have to follow, and these dates give us time to follow those guidelines. So please mark your calendars so that we can hopefully get to compliance by December 31st, 2025, or risk losing that grant funding that Robin outlined. It's worth noting that we need a simple majority to approve this bylaw, not a 2/3 vote. So that's sort of what's happening in the coming months. There will be more opportunities for public conversation. Ultimately, there will be a planning board public hearing on this as required by law. That would be early fall. We've got a whole communications plan and outreach plan that we're developing. And we really, really do appreciate your input, your feedback, and your engagement with this process. So I'm going to open this up to Q&A, and hopefully one of us on this planning team can answer your questions. And if not, we'll get the answers for you, because this is a super valuable piece of the process for us. So off to Q&A.
Yeah, everybody, thank you. We're going to open it up, obviously, for Q&A now. We just asked that if you'd like to ask a question of the panel, just go ahead and use the raise hand feature on the bottom of your screen. If you would like to ask, we will call as the hands are raised. So please feel free to ask a question. We'd really like to hear from you. Nobody has any questions. We're also accepting comments as well. So don't feel like you have to ask a question. Feel free to share really any feedback that you have if you'd like to share.
Seems like you've perfected this presentation.
I was going to say we have very
I don't
little.
know.
Oh, finally,
Jody, I would
there's
say
a
this is
question.
probably
We
the
do have
best
one question.
presentation given by a resident of any of the communities I've worked in.
Oh,
Seriously,
Jeff.
well done.
Thank you.
All right, so we do ask, we will pull you over to ask your question when you raise a hand, but if you could, prior to asking your question, just state your name and address for us, that would be great. So say we'll go allowed to talk. All right, so looks like we have a work laptop here. You just want to give us a name and address. Are you with us?
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes.
Great, I feel like I'm calling into a radio station here, trying to win tickets to the Celtics. Okay, I just wanted to start with one quick comment. I can't remember who said that there might be 3 towns in legal action. There's actually 5 towns suing the state, but there's another 31 towns that have decided not to submit compliant plans by the deadline, which is, I think, practically 20%, 1 out of every 5 of the 177 communities that are required. So there is definitely pushback. I just want to mention that because someone had said that earlier. But I had a question. I guess it's, I think, to Robin, I believe, Ms. Hunter, about the grants that we would be losing out on. Now, I saw the slide, and it's not clear to me that of the grants that you listed, I think from 2020 to 2024, the 5.6 million. If those were just every grant that we've ever received from the state, because it seems like your website has a list of the grants that could be revoked or taken away or we can't apply for if we fail to comply. And I think it only lists 14 very particular grants. So I guess my question, just as a clarifying comment, is: are those grants that you listed during those years only cover those 14 grants that the MBTA Communities Act will take away from us? Because I think not every grant is created equal, and I think those are the ones that they say they target. And so my question is, the 5.6 that you listed during those periods of time, are those the grants that we could lose, or are those just every grant that we've ever gotten from Massachusetts during the 4 years, 5 years?
It would be great
And
if you could identify yourself.
I'm sorry, Ken Slowey, 120 Center Street.
Okay, so I tried to make clear, and clearly I was not successful. So as a town, I have no idea what grants are going to be available in the future. So the slide I put together was based upon history. Now, we only apply for grants that would help offset projects that we're going to do. So there are many more grants available, but those grants may not be applicable to the town of Dover. We also know, like, I've listened to a couple of MMA conferences, and nothing is off the table. Like, nobody knows for certain what grants we wouldn't be eligible for and what grants we may still be eligible for. So all we can do is present to you what historically we've applied for, grants that we know that we are going to apply for in the near future. But unfortunately, I don't have a crystal ball to be able to give you a specific number of grants and the amount of those grants, which is why I tried to show that looking back at grants that we've applied for since 2020, you know, some years it was as light as 300,000, and other years it was in excess of 2. It just really depends on the project we're doing or planning to do, and whether or not there is a grant that exists that can help us defray those costs. So I hate to be squirrely and wishy-washy, but unfortunately, there is no definitive answer.
Well, I appreciate that, but I don't think you need a crystal ball to look back in history and just identify of the 14 grants that we are told as a town in the 177 MBTA Communities Act, of the 14 particular grants that will be taken away, that we've received money from these grants or not over the last 5 years. I'm not asking to guess what the future grants we might apply. I'm just saying not every grant is created equal. Can the law change? Can they add other grants? Yeah, maybe. I'm going to make a decision based upon the law as today, which has 14 particular grants that we will not be allowed to get if we don't comply. And I would like to know, of those 14 grants, those 14 particular grants called out in the law, how much money have we received for each of those grants over the last 5 years?
Well, I will go back and do that calculation for you. You know, we pulled in the grants that we have applied for as a town, that we know as a town we may lose. You know, again,
Well, how do we know that they're not listed in the 14? Are they that are?
well, they
Uh,
fall under some of these categories that are listed. There are other categories that we haven't applied for. So rather than me err and give you information that's incorrect, let me go back and highlight those with the assistant of the town staff.
I would appreciate that. Thank you so much. Again, what I'm really looking for is the 14 that are called out for how much we've received in the last 5 years. Let's give it a 5-year span, a look back. All bets are off in the future. No one has a crystal ball as far as what else they might add to that to really get towns to comply. I'm not going to make a decision based upon what could happen in the future. Of those 14 grants that we know we will lose, how much did we actually get from those grants over the last 5 years per grant?
Okay, so
Some of
these
them
are
look like they never even-
category of grants. So what you're looking for is for us to take the grants that we've received and assign them to each of the categories that are listed.
If that's your understanding, yes, I think that would be fine. Okay, when I looked at the website, maybe I can look at it again. I thought they were particular grants. I didn't know that they were areas or so if they are areas of grants, then sure, please let me know that these are the grants that we would not have received, because I'm just looking at it as the 2 million, and I know it varies from year to year, but I'm just thinking that's all the grants that we get, and we're not every grant is under the scrutiny of this law. So I'm just trying to see what the real damage is going to be, to determine how big a risk we're running here. So that's what I'd like, is just an actual accountability for the last 5 years for each of those. I thought they were particular grants, but if they're areas of grants, I would just like to know.
There are areas of grants, and grants that we've received fall under these categories.
Okay, I will endeavor to research that a little further myself as well. Thank you for letting me know that. But again, I'm not looking just for every grant, just the ones that we know we're going to miss out because of non-compliance.
So Ken, this is Carol Lisbon. Just another piece of information is that what we've heard from the state over the last 12 to 18 months is a stick approach
Yeah.
to the towns and comments about adding to the grants that might be at risk. It's not objective at this point, it's subjective, but they do throw that out. We also heard from our Congressman, Jake Auchincloss, who made a comment at a meeting of his constituents that should a town not comply with the MBTA Communities Act, that he and his staff would not support the town in getting federal money, grant money.
Well, I think it's abhorrent that he would take that approach. He doesn't work for the federal government. He has no right to take federal grants away from us. If he wants to make it tough, that's I guess his right, and we can vote him out. But you're right, it is all stick. And what I'm finding when I'm reading objectively is the stick is being wielded more and more as more towns are pushing back and successfully pushing back, especially with the state auditor saying it's not even a law, it's an unfunded mandate. So I think the stick is going to be wielded more and more as they bully and do whatever they can. But thank you. Those are still important points. But the main point for me is, you're right. They could add other things to really force us to do this. But I'm not going to make a decision based on what could happen in the future. As far as right now, there are 14. I thought particular grants, but maybe areas of grant, and that's all I want.
Okay.
So thank you very much, and thank you.
And Ken, if you do additional research, as well as Robin and the Selectman's Office will, if you could share that with us, we'd appreciate it.
I would absolutely love to, and I appreciate all your hard work. And I think we'll collect information and make the best decision for the town of Dover. and to keep the character of our town. But I appreciate your service. I will definitely share that information with you. And
Great, thank you so much.
and any information we have, if you can get that onto the website too, I think that would be super as well.
We will do so. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Carol and Robin. Thank you.
All right, next, recognizing Janice, if you just want to share your name and address with us.
Yeah, can you hear me right now?
Yep.
Okay, great. Yeah, so Janice Abramovitz, I am a county court resident. I live on Tisdale Drive. And I just have a couple of questions. My first question is how many participants are actually on this call this evening?
We have had 22.
Okay. Okay. And I do want to thank you for the explanation that you gave, more detail as far as what the MBTA Act cannot force the town to do. So that was very helpful. I think what I'm struggling with, though, is to declare, this overlay. Let's say you pick county court or some other place. In essence, what you're telling us is you're just putting a label on county court as an MBTA overlay site. But then where's the meat that, I'm sure the state is going to want? Right? They're just not putting they're not putting this mandate in place to just say, okay, towns, just pick a place and put a label on it and that's it. I've got to believe that there is an intent to then put more housing that would be multifamily housing. And my concern with where I live is there's really not a lot of land to expand out. Where there's a lot of other land within Dover that are empty lots, empty parcels, where someone could, if you zone it, can spread out and build X amount of units.
Well, maybe I could take a stab at a response. I'm not sure it's an answer because I
Okay,
think
sure.
I'm not sure if that's a specific question or more of a comment, but
All
I
the
do
above.
yeah,
Yeah.
thank you. I do take your point. I think that what you're referring to is not unique to Dover. And many of the small adjacent towns, particularly ones with a rural character and little or no infrastructure, like town sewer or town water, are struggling with this exact same question, because it's one thing to zone for multifamily development, and it's quite another to have the infrastructure available to actually build and serve that multifamily development. And my understanding, for what it's worth, is that the state has a very strong interest in having this zoning available, whether or not it can be built or will be built in the near or even long-term future is not the problem they're trying to tackle in the immediate, because many communities will have overlay districts where there is no water available and there is no town sewer available or capacity for septic to meet the demands associated with a multifamily development. And so as we think about moving to town meeting, we do so understanding that our job here as a town is not to necessarily select and draft a bylaw that can or will or could be developed. It's to have a bylaw that meets legal compliance, and eventually, someday, maybe a developer will have an interest in pursuing development, but that is really not our job, although I hate that phrase, to zone for something that is necessarily developable at this time. Does that help? We're not the only town struggling with that, but I
Yeah.
do,
So it's almost like window dressing.
well,
Here we go. Well, it is, right? If there's no intent of the state to then say, okay, you've now, have designated this as multifamily and the amount, let's say, of the units in county court aren't enough for what the state is looking for, then
Right. Well, the
is
units
ahead.
in county court, that might be a bit of a misunderstanding because, if we decided, for example, to put an overlay district on Junction Street, to take a relevant example from this evening, underlying zoning on Junction Street remains in force. So the property owner on Junction Street has every right to just go build a single family house on the overlay district. That's totally within the right of the property owner. The difference with an overlay district is that the property owner has a second way they theoretically could go if infrastructure requirements are able to be met, wetlands requirements are able to be met. So it's like an extra layer of opportunity or option. It's not a requirement. So you could say the exact same thing if we put this on a very big single family parcel somewhere else in town. That owner would never ever be required to have multifamily housing developed there if they chose not to. And that you could say would be window dressing, but it's still the same.
No, well, the reason I brought up about a big parcel of land, should the owner that lives there today, or maybe it's just a big, acres of empty property, should a developer decide to buy that property in the future and it's already zoned for multifamily, that is a lot of the work that developers, work with the towns to try to get in place. So that legwork has already been done. For some time in the future, should someone decide to sell the property. I'm just saying
and I think the same would hold true because there's a condo association, for example, at county court, right? And if enough, it would take quite a lift, that is true, but it's not an impossibility necessarily. And also, I just might add to sort of further this point, this is why I mentioned pre-review, because we are working here we're juggling a lot of balls of things that are unknown. It's grant funding, it's location selection, it's bylaw terminology. And so the pre-review process will reveal some of the state's thinking on this topic. And this is why we think it's very important to go through the pre-review process so that we don't get to town meeting, take a vote on something, and then have the Attorney General turn around and say, no, you can't do that. So we're trying to multi-track here. But your point is well taken. It's a bit of a philosophical issue, and that's maybe at the state level a philosophical issue too. Do they want the zoning, or are they going to require that the zoning exist in places where it's actually feasible today to build it? And if that was the case, Dover would have a really big problem, as would many other towns where the infrastructure capacity does not currently exist.
I think this is spot on. It's a philosophical question, whether the town wants to put this where new development could actually happen or where development already is. I know from the state's perspective, particularly in the context of an adjacent small town, that they would not feel this way if there was, an MBTA station in your community. But in your context, the fact that by adopting this zoning, to create county courts, you had to go through the 40B process, right? This was something that was against your zoning. It's its own process. But by establishing an MBTA communities overlay here, you're now lifting that. You're now making it by right, so that in the future, what's already been built could be built again by right and not have to go through the 40B process. And again, in the context of a small town adjacent, the state is happy with that. So that's what they see they're getting, even if no new units are built in the near term.
And then what is the downside to designating more than one overlay? Right? If the intent is to show the state that you're going along with their mandate, wouldn't it be beneficial to have the 3 different sites be overlay? Then it shows that Dover is in more compliance as far as the number of units that are there and space where units could be built in the future.
Well, again, that's a philosophical issue. It depends on your perspective.
I understand that. Yeah.
You know, so I thought your question was about whether we could imagine multiple smaller overlay districts to meet our unit capacity requirement. And that gets kind of hairy because of contiguity requirements with those smaller parcels. So what we sort of think philosophically, given so much interest in this issue, not only here in Dover, but quite obviously at the state level. We want to be as compliant as we need to be, but we want to do that in a way that will get as many people on board with this notion in Dover. And we've seen that happen in other towns, notably Needham, who went through this entire process and they zoned for much, much more capacity than they were required to. And then I believe it was a citizen petition to revoke the approval, and they had to go through the process again, and they skinnied down their ultimate zoning. So it's an interesting thought, but probably not a path we want to follow here in Dover. I would say, from my perspective on the planning board, based upon lessons learned elsewhere.
Okay, thank you very much.
You're welcome. Thanks for the question. Carol, I see your hand is up.
Oh, whoops, sorry about that.
Oh, do you have a question? Pop quiz.
All right, do we have any more questions from the attendees tonight?
Okay, well, in that case, there was one question that I'm not sure everybody saw, and that was whether we're going to hold an additional session that might be in person. So we do have a public hearing that is on the calendar for September 8th. We're hoping to use the new community center, which will have the opportunity and exactly, and the technology exists there to hold a hybrid meeting. So we can have our public hearing that will be both in attendance and on Zoom. So stay tuned for that. That will be very exciting for very many reasons. Again, these were some great questions and comments tonight. Thank you so much for attending. If you have any thoughts afterwards, and as you start reading more material on this, please go to the planning board website. Our emails are there, and please let us know. We continue to hear from you. And we will be presenting to the Board of Selectmen at their May 29th meeting, which you can either attend via Zoom or watch in replay, where we'll be going over where we are and what's in store between the end of May and September 29th, the special town meeting, in pretty granular detail as well. So there'll be lots of opportunities to keep you informed, and we just ask that you keep us informed as well as your thinking progresses on this. And let's see, Chris has included in the chat the link to our MBTA webpage on the Dover website. So seeing nothing more, once again, thank you so much, everyone, and good evening.
Thank you.